Following the conquest of the Muslims under the Prophet Mohammed, and long after, by the 11th century, Islam had spread out from all of the Arabian Peninsula, across North Africa, from Egypt to Morocco, into Spain, Portugal, across the Mediterranean, into Sicily, Sardinia, Italy, and all the region we call Palestine today, including Israel, Syria, Turkey, and Jordan, all the way into India. The fact that Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and other holy Christian locations were in the hands of infidels was a major point of concern to both the Roman Catholic Church and the Greek Orthodox Church of the Byzantine Empire. Many Christians felt that something had to be done. What caused the Crusades? Why was it deemed imperative to invade the Holy Land? Were there other reasons to start a religious war? What were the eventual outcomes?
Hello, I'm Colin Heaton, military veteran, historian, author, and welcome to this episode of Forgotten History.
Islamic expansion throughout the world had been growing, and in most cases, it was a brutal conquest. Although many of the Muslim leaders were quite tolerant of Jews and Christians, whom they allowed to live in relative peace as subjects, did not force their conversion en masse, and simply had them pay a tax called the Dhimma. However, Europe was also in constant wars as restless rulers invaded their neighbors, slaughtering millions for centuries, each side proclaiming that God is with us. Major events were when William, Duke of Normandy, invaded Christian England in 1066 and King Harold Godwinson was killed, with William becoming William I, and then Scotland was invaded. France was in upheaval by revolts, and William's sons were fighting each other. In Germany, Henry II spent 20 years fighting King Ardoin of Lombardy, and another war against King Boleslav of Poland. Then he fought Baldwin of Flanders and suppressed a revolt by Rudolf of Swabia. Italy was in flames, and the Normans, under Humphrey Guiscard, fought the papal army capturing Pope Leo IX. His brother Robert destroyed the Byzantines in Italy in 1071, the same year that the Battle of Manzikert. Urban II had seen enough, and he decided a unifying action to stop the carnage in Europe was required. Finally, the combination of Muslims occupying Christian lands, especially Jerusalem, as well as growing turmoil within the Catholic Church, were the catalyst for action. Upon becoming Pope in 1088, Urban II was approached by Byzantine Emperor Alexios I Comnenus in March 1095. The Eastern Christians had been fighting the Muslims for centuries, yet were heavily outnumbered and had lost territory. The Seljuks had been successful against the Byzantines, such as at the Battle of Manzikert in Armenia in August of 1071. Afterward, the Muslims took Edessa and Antioch, and by 1078 the Seljuks had expanded their territory and established their capital at Nicaea in Bithynia in northwest Turkey. By 1087, they had taken and conquered Jerusalem. Urban II had in fact previously assisted the Byzantines in 1091 against the Peschenberg invasion in the northern Danube region. Urban saw this plea from Alexios and the Muslim occupation of Jerusalem as the perfect reason to try and halt the fratricidal fighting in Europe. But Urban was also a politician, and the challenge to his papacy by the anti-pope Clement III had shaken the Church and created divided European loyalties, and retaking the Holy Land back would protect and secure his position as the only legitimate pope. Urban knew that retaking such holy sites as the tomb of Jesus Christ, the Temple Mount, and the Holy Sepulchre, also called the Church of the Resurrection in Jerusalem, would give his papacy more power, prestige, and, above all, leverage against the warring kings of Europe and ensure his position. Urban was also cognizant of history, as previous popes had been forced to flee Rome, often to France, for safety due to unrest among European rulers. a crusade against the infidels uniting the Western and Eastern European Christians in a vast army to retake Jerusalem served many purposes. Urban II also hoped to make himself head of a united Christian church combining East and West, since the two churches had split since 1054 over disagreements about doctrine and liturgical practices. Urban justified the crusade by calling it a liberation of Christians and holy sites from Muslim control, and he called for the Holy War on November 27, 1095, in his speech during the Council of Clermont, France. But Urban did not just have to convince the warring nobility to stop fighting each other. He had to convince the commoners, the peasants, the merchants, and others who would be needed to include the city-states that would supply the Crusaders. Urban made the prospect of joining the fight very enticing, stating that those who defended Christendom would be on a pilgrimage, and all of their sins would be forgiven, and their souls would ascend immediately to heaven. That must have been very attractive to the murderous nobles looking for absolution. Urban II launched a recruiting tour in France during 1095 and 1096, where he exaggerated stories about Christian monuments being defiled and Christians were being persecuted, tortured, and killed. Major churches, monasteries, and dioceses were turned into recruiting centers, which was quite successful, appealing to both noble and commoner alike. Those who answered the call took an oath to fight for Christ, and many wore red crosses to show their dedication. Although accurate figures are difficult to confirm, a good estimate is that 60,000 Europeans, led by around 6,000 knights, gathered for departure, and they headed east in 1096. In order to have the Byzantines totally on board, it was agreed that when Crusaders recaptured areas formerly under Byzantine rule, those lands would be ceded back to the government in Constantinople, hence Alexios. Many battles were fought, and the Europeans recaptured Nicaea and Antioch on their way to Jerusalem. They recaptured Jerusalem without much difficulty. But what were the Muslims doing at this time? Well, the occupying Sunni Seljuks were already having conflicts with the Egyptian and Syrian Shiite Fatimids, fierce rivals for control of all Islamic territory. The Seljuks had taken Jerusalem from the Fatimids, and they wanted it back. Just like their European counterparts, the Muslims were killing each other over real estate and ideology, such as the Sunni and Shiites quarreling over who the true successor to Muhammad was. That fracture within Islam would aid the Christians greatly. But the Crusaders once again got lucky because the Seljuk Sunni leader Sultan Malik Shah died in 1092, leaving a power vacuum, and various warlords were fighting each other to take top prize. The other problem for the Seljuks was that their power base was established in Baghdad, too far away from modern-day Israel to effectively control the area from invasion. Without a central command and control authority, the Seljuks were fragmented and effectively leaderless. The sporadic fighting between their forces and the Western Europeans was not seen as a major threat at that time. The Seljuks had dealt with border skirmishes with the Byzantines for centuries. They had no idea what was coming. But the Europeans, while large in number, were not exactly a cohesive fighting force. Despite many well-known and successful knights and combat leaders, the majority of the Crusaders were lesser nobles, many without any combat experience, and thousands of peasants, many without armor and weapons. This ragtag collective was led by the preacher Peter the Hermit and the landless knight Walter the Penniless. He was named that for a good reason. Peter had been to the Holy Land before and had been captured and tortured by the Muslims, and when he told his stories of abuse, it only inflamed his followers as he had credibility. The other groups from Northern Europe, led by Count Amicio of Leiningen, attacked Jews in Speyer, Mainz, Trier, and Cologne along the way, as they continued on to Constantinople, continuing their debauchery into the early summer of 1096. Anna Komnena, the historian and daughter of the Byzantine Emperor, described these pathetic creatures arriving from Europe and what happened to them. They were promptly shipped by Alexios to Asia Minor, where, ignoring the Byzantines' advice, they were ambushed and wiped out near Nicaea by a Seljuk army led by Kilij Arslan I on 21st of October 1096. This was not what Alexios or Pope Urban II had in mind when they started off the Crusade movement. These groups foraged as they marched, buying what they could or sometimes just stealing what they needed, which did not endear them to the various locals. In fact, the peasant crusaders tried to attack Constantinople but were repulsed. Other crusaders who followed were often met with open hostility instead of the welcome they expected as a result of their predecessors' actions. This was especially true of the second group, comprised of proper noblemen, knights, and professional soldiers, but leading this group were some old enemies of Emperor Alexios. Cultural tensions were running high. Bohemond of Taranto and his father, Robert Guiscard, also known as Robert the Crafty, the Duke of Apulia, had attacked Greece between 1081 and 1084. In 1097, Bohemond and his knights arrived in Constantinople, where the Norman knight joined other well-known leaders, such as Godfrey of Bouillon, the Duke of Lower Lorraine, and Raymond IV, also known as Raymond de Saint Gilles, Count of Toulouse. Bohemond's nephew Tancred was there, along with Robert of Normandy and Robert of Flanders. To keep the pace, all swore allegiance to Emperor Alexios to maintain the unified Christian force, and they agreed to the return of Byzantine lands once recaptured. This was another reason for their success, a unified force combining East and West. Otherwise, the entire First Crusade would have undoubtedly ended in failure. Alexios placed General Tatikios in command of his forces, and they recaptured Nicaea in June 1097, although the outnumbered Seljuks abandoned the city and fell back to consolidate their force. The Christians then defeated the Seljuks at Dorylaeon in July 1st, 1097. The Seljuks, facing defeat after defeat, were even more vulnerable from their Shiite enemies as well. Their inability to unite both sects of Islam, set aside their differences, was costing them territory. Meanwhile, carrying on in the world's second oldest profession, despite the raping, killing, and pillaging conducted by the Western Europeans, even against fellow Christians along the way, Alexios tolerated their barbaric methods, knowing that their success would create a buffer zone between the Byzantine Empire and the Muslim threat. Then, in September 1097, the Crusaders and Byzantines divided their forces, each with different objectives. Their primary target for the Crusaders was Antioch, which was a well-fortified city and not easily taken. The Crusaders established an 8-month-long siege to starve the city out, but they were attacked by a Seljuk army dispatched from Mosul, which the Christians defeated, and despite suffering from desertions, attacks, and plague, Bohemond took the city on June 3rd, 1098. During the siege, Alexios was leading an army to support the Crusaders, but he was informed erroneously that they were about to be defeated by the Seljuks, so he retreated back home. Bohemond learned about the abandonment by Alexios, and he was less than pleased with his former enemy and current ally. As a result, Bohemond decided that he would keep the conquered city, becoming king of Antioch and all other territories for himself rather than surrender them to the Byzantines. The one great result of these operations was that the fragmented Seljuks were kept in check, unable to mount any real effective attacks, and had their force divided to protect their southern flank from the Shiite Fatimids coming out of Egypt. The Crusaders were capturing dozens of cities along the way, including critical port cities for resupply. Of the combined force of the original 60,000 that departed Europe, only around 1,300 knights and some 12,500 infantry stood outside Jerusalem on June 7, 1099. This was what was left of the great army to take back the ultimate objective of the First Crusade. The Seljuks may have felt confident that the great walls of the city and the small numbers of Christians would not see the city fall. However, thanks to Bohemond, who was not an idiot, and having the foresight to capture the ports, their fortunes changed. Ships from Genoa arrived soon afterward with food, extra soldiers, and timber to make catapults and siege towers. Inside Jerusalem, the Muslim defenders were not too worried, as they expected a relief force to arrive from Egypt and/or Syria, believing that their Muslim brothers, despite being recent enemies, would come to their aid. Godfrey of Bouillon attacked what he perceived to be a weak point at the wall. He waited until nightfall and brought a siege tower to cross the portion of the moat that his men had filled, and his men managed to enter the city on July 15, 1099. What happened next was nothing short of a full massacre against Muslims and Jews inside the city, and of the 30,000 inhabitants, about 3,000 were killed, the rest surrendering. Pope Urban II had died on July 29, 1099, perhaps not even knowing that his crusade was, in fact, a success. In August, the expected relief force from Egypt did finally attempt to reach Jerusalem, but they were defeated at the Battle of Ascalon, and Godfrey of Bouillon was made the king of Jerusalem. In 1100, another group of crusaders arrived in Constantinople, led by Raymond of Toulouse. On May 17, 1101, he captured Caesarea and Acre on May 26th. On September 1101, an army of Lombard, French, and German knights was defeated by the Seljuks. Things were only going to get more difficult for Western armies over the next couple of centuries of warfare, as the Muslims finally united over time to address the threat. Upset with the situation, Alexios sent a force to retake Antioch after Bohemond left and returned to Italy, where he convinced the French king Philip I and the new Pope, Paschal II, that the real threat to the Christian world was the Byzantines. The Crusaders attacked the Byzantines, and Alexios I's army defeated them, and Pope Paschal II abandoned his support of the campaign. Bohemond had no choice but to accept subservience to Alexios I, who let him rule Antioch, but to rule in Alexios' name. The end result was a strong European presence in the Holy Land, but that would not go unchallenged in the future. The Crusaders learned to accept the very diverse populations under their rule in order to survive, let alone thrive, so slaughtering Muslims was not considered a good business plan. Over the next 200 years, there would be more crusades, all following the same rationale and pattern established by Urban II, which would eventually end in defeat and expulsion of the Europeans in the early 14th century. And that's history. Thanks for watching today's episode of Forgotten History. If you like this episode, please consider becoming a channel member or joining our Patreon page. This would help us offset the ever-increasing cost of production. As always, please like, share, and comment. And if you have any show ideas, please contact us, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. Until next time.